we're here with a very distinguished panel. And this panel, as you know, was assembled because they represent the 7 sectors seen as the key drivers of Philippine economic growth. And, well, these sectors, not all of them, by the way, are experiencing growth in varying degrees, but not quite as fast as expected given the optimism in the environment, not quite as fast as expected given the potential of our country, and surely not quite as fast as the growth of our neighbors in the ASEAN region. So we want to ask our panel, not just what's holding them back, what's holding their sectors back from growth, but more importantly, we want to ask them what they think they need for their sectors to grow more quickly, more rapidly. Now, let's just do a little reality check here. We have 8 panelists, and I have 35 minutes to discuss this topic here at hand. So the Secretariat has wisely advised me to limit my question to this singular one. We want to ask our panel members here just one question. What are the 3, it can be 1, it can be 2, but what are the 3 policies or programs needed to boost or accelerate your sectors in 2012? Not in 2050, but in 2012, immediately this year. Let's begin with our first sector. We have 7 sectors, as you can see, represented in this colorful logo in front of me. Let's start with agribusiness. Very important sector, a key employer in the country. Employment needed in places with the most poverty, most acute poverty in the country, poverty creating problems in peace and security. Philip Soliven, who is the country representative of Cargill, Philippines. 3 programs, policies, could be legislation required to boost your sector.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Good day to everyone. Actually, I'll save you some time, so I'll talk about 2 themes, basically, that I think are important for our country. Well, let me basically, the first theme I would say is actually the structural deficits for food in Asia and the relevance of the FTAs as it relates to these deficits. And the second theme is food security in the Philippines. Okay. Let me first paint the picture for about 20 seconds. We estimate that in the 1960s, the mid-60s basically, the structural deficit for food in Asia as a whole was about 20 million metric tons. Today, we figure that number is about 200 million metric tons. Okay. What we're saying here basically is, for a very, very long time, Asia has not been able to grow or produce its own food, or enough food basically to feed itself. So it's had to import. Okay. Now, I think what's important to realize with this particular piece of data is, in fact, with the availability of free trade agreements today, that big Asian market is really open to the Philippines, to Philippine food exports. Much in the same way as obviously the Philippines contributes to the deficit, right, by being itself structurally deficient in food. Okay. But in reality, we need to recognize the fact that actually a lot of the food that we grow in Asia, someone out there needs, and not necessarily, we don't necessarily have to focus on the Philippines. Okay. Now the second issue is around food security. And basically, how do we define food security? Food security basically is actually having sufficient food, okay, of good nutrition and safe food basically at all times. And it has to be affordable as well. I think when we look at this issue and how, if we define food security as opposed to self-sufficiency, self-sufficiency is basically growing your own food. But the question is, will we ever really be self-sufficient in many of the food products that we need? Okay? And is self-sufficiency really the right strategy to take for our government, basically? Because we hear about this now as it relates, for example, to rice. When in fact, it is possible to buy a lot of the food that we need from somewhere else, basically. And maybe we should also focus on trying to feed others in the region who also need the food that we have.
So Philip, you've identified the problem and the potential, but going back to the key question, can you name at least one program, one policy that you'd like to see immediately implemented?
Sure. Out of Mindanao, we actually have the ability to export pork to significant markets such as Malaysia and China. If you think about Malaysia, it is a Muslim country, but there's a large Chinese community there basically that actually consumes pork. And that ability is available to us today. It is an FMD-free location. I understand that there have been already accredited slaughterhouses, for example, and accredited pork raisers. We should push that. We should push exporting of pork to basically Malaysia and in fact China as well.
All right. We can go back to Philip if there's time. We will allow some questions from the floor, again, if there is time at the end of our forum. So let's proceed to the next sector, the business process outsourcing sector, once the darling, and still in many ways the darling of the Philippine economy, but there are questions and worries about its sustainability. Alfredo Ayala, who is the chairman of Business Processing Association of the Philippines, name at least 3 policies, programs you'd like to see implemented immediately.
Thanks, David. Let me start by just providing the context. We talk about the IT BPO industry's goals. It's very simple. Number one, we want to be number one. We have become number one in voice, which is quite a feat when you consider there are 11 Indians for every 1 Filipino. But we're also now a solid number 2 in non-voice. We would like to be number 1 in back office, creative, and certain segments of IT. I think in terms of the second goal, it's continuing our inclusive and rapid growth. When I say inclusive, to respond to Secretary Ocampo, really a lot of the focus of the industry has been to progress beyond the fresh grads in commerce and communications doing entry-level call center work and expanding that twofold. One is down the chain. We're actually now hiring a lot more high school graduates, which means much larger numbers to do basic work. But we're also now hiring many more engineers, architects, lawyers, doctors, nurses to do much more complex work. In terms of the numbers, we've grown from virtually 0 in 2000, as recently as 2000, to this year we'll achieve 11 billion in exports, 600,000 in direct jobs, and 2 million in total jobs when you include the indirect jobs from the ripple effect, construction workers, etc. We've planned a roadmap for 2016. Our stretch goal is to get to 1.3 million direct employees, 4 million total employees, and $25 billion in exports, virtually doubling. That's a 15% growth. The big if, right, is that's the stretch goal. We will never achieve that goal unless we really step up our partnership with the government. We've called it IPPP, or an industry public-private partnership focused on maximizing an entire industry. The government has been historically a supportive partner. We need the government to be an extremely supportive partner. I think we're encouraged by progress in the main 3 areas, and I'll get to the specifics that we'd like to see.
Okay.
The main 3 areas where we need to partner with government are, number 1, talent supply, which basically is an infrastructure issue. And I mean education infrastructure, of course. Where we've been encouraged is we've seen TESDA allocate 500 million pesos for near-hire training, which we need to continue. Very effective. If you take the top quartile of rejects and invest 100 hours, $100 to train them, 70% are employable. It's a very, very quick payback. We need to expand that. With CHED, we're working with them to create a BPO curriculum called Service Management, which will, give our students the basic skills so that they're immediately hireable. We're implementing, we hope to roll out what we call GCAT, or a Global Competitiveness Assessment Test, which is like an NCEE or SAT for BPO, so that, again, these workers are much more employable. And in the case of ICTO, which is part of the Department of Science and Technology, we're now assembling funding to address the other key issue for us, which is domestic marketing. Actually, the biggest job we have is convincing parents and convincing all of you that this is, in fact, the best, or not, if not one of the best career opportunities for a young Filipino. So we need to do a better job of explaining that to our students. And the last area where we'd really like to see progress is funding for our country branding. We're very excited and looking forward to having more fun But really our hope is that the campaigns are not just about our beaches, but are about our workforce as well. It is still a big issue that we have to contend with, the CNN effect, etc. So we are hoping that there can be specific funding for this country branding. So, David, thank you.
You said you had specifics in mind?
Yes, sorry, and the last, so the specifics are continue the talent funding from CHED and TESDA. I meant to mention on the legislative front, extremely important, we need the data privacy and the cybercrime and the rationalization of fiscal incentives and the DICT bills, which are all progressing, and the JFC, Joint Foreign Chambers, has been a wonderful partner. We need to actually get those across the finish line, just like we did with the Labor Amendment Act, which has been very helpful. The country branding, we just need the funding, and we need to get it actually going.
All right, thank you so much, Alfredo Ayala, representing the BPO sector. Let's move on now to a sector which I would call quite undervalued, but showing extreme or high potential in terms of driving the economy and branding the country as unique, not just in the region, but in the world. I'm speaking about the creative industries of the Philippines. And let's move on now to Henry Schumacher to give us his, top 3 on his wish list.
Thank you. I think there's only 2. I envy Fred Ayala from a point of view that he has an organization, he chairs an organization that is a sunrise industry and growing very fast. I believe the creative industry has the same, or is doing the same. We have about 14 subsectors in that industry that grow individually. We contribute about 5% to GDP, but, and that's my first point, we have been trying for years, and Governor Marcos was part of this exercise, in uniting that industry and putting it together. We have failed so far. There have been attempts, and I think we should, from the private sector point of view, get that together in 2012. And I think we need a master plan. I think we have to be part of that master plan. Where do we want to go? The second point I would like to make is that luckily we have 2 bills on creative industry and reviving the design center of the Philippines in the Senate. They are moving, and I think it's important that they come to legislation. Unfortunately, in the House we have nothing until now. If the bills in the Senate are going to become reality, we will have a private-public consortium then, or a council that will govern or run this industry. My wish would be that it is private sector led. So these are the 2 things that should happen in 2012.
But just very quickly, Henry, do you think there's a critical mass of creative talent in the country for it to make an economic difference?
I think the Filipino is creative. I think we are making the big mistake in exporting that creativity, I mean the people. We have not succeeded in keeping that talent here and exporting that service. So it's no good that I hear creative Singapore, but in the end it's the Filipinos in Singapore that create the creativity. That we should not allow to happen.
Thank you so much, Henry Schumacher, speaking for the creative industries of the country. Let's move on now to logistics, and we have Michael Raeuber, President of Royal Cargo Combined Logistics, who will also give his own top 3, perhaps, on his wish list. Things that need immediate implementation in this country to get the logistics sector moving.
Thank you very much. Well, a proven success enabler in business always has been an aggressive follow-through and proper implementation. So I would like to focus first on the goals of Arangkada for logistics, and particularly some of the few areas where we have made progress. And I think we have to follow through and enable those. So first, promoting and competitively connecting the ports of Batangas and Subic to the markets, competitively enabling to do that. Right now, the utilization of the Batangas port is by about 1.5%, while Subic is utilized at 5%. Second, allow PESA less container load cargoes to be deconsolidated within the PESA zones, therefore severely driving down the cost to do that. This is very much supported by PESA and by CEPI and other business organizations. We are still awaiting the go signal of the Bureau of Customs. And then exercise the sovereign control over CIQ, Customs, Immigration, Quarantine Services, by providing such wherever needed, paid by the government, not paid by private entities. I personally feel that we are jeopardizing, or the government is jeopardizing control over their own people by letting private enterprise pay actually for sovereign acts of the government. That's my first point. Second point, make Subic a true free port by removing customs to the periphery of a designed free port area within the present complex and allow shipments consigned to order, this way creating the base of an Asian distribution center of goods. We do have a free port, we do not have a true free port as we define it, because there is no free flow of cargo to and from, because customs is still within the port. The base for that port is insufficient if we are not creating new opportunities for the port itself. That was my second point. The third one, seriously reduce red tape and prevent corruption in the Bureau of Customs. New red tape and drastic fines are imposed for minor administrative infractions unrelated to revenue collections, which, if unchecked, will provide a fertile opportunity of corruption. You know that we have ongoing IT programs to link the importers and exporters directly to the Bureau, reducing interpersonal transactions between the importers and the offices. Well, as I just mentioned, there are new challenges coming forward by putting up administrative fines for repertorial requirements, very high fines. Now, if this is not being checked, there are new opportunities coming up. But to answer the question to the point, don't let manual systems continue parallel to their computerized versions. And on the legislative sector, pass the Customs and Tariff Modernization Act and ratify the Kyoto Protocol on modernizing customs procedures. This in tandem will go a long, long way to make the Philippines a choice location for investments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Without logistics, there is no trade. And interesting that you mentioned, 2 of the 3 points you mentioned had to do with infrastructure. Our next session will be entirely about infrastructure, precisely because we feel this is really the only way this country is going to grow, with heavy investment in infrastructure. So please wait for that. In the meantime, I don't want to preempt that discussion, so let's move on with the other panelists here. Manufacturing, always seen as, at least in this country, erratic growth, problematic for many. Some have even mentioned and have even suggested that it's time to move on to a different development model. But of course, manufacturing is key for employment, for development. And let's hear from the sector. Let's start with Dan Lachica, President of the First Philex Solar Corporation. Is there hope?
Good morning. First of all, before I go to the 3 areas and the specifics, allow me to give you a backgrounder. I represent the literally a sunrise industry, the solar industry in the Philippines. And this is the business that is essentially a baby of the Lopez group of companies. Actually, I see our chairman emeritus in the back, Mr. Oscar Lopez, back there. But the reason I think I was invited here is because of my role in the semiconductor and electronics industry, being the past chairman. And let me just give you a background on the industry. It used to be, accounted for about 70% of the country's export. But and it was an industry that essentially was left by the government to do so because why fix something that wasn't broken, right? But since the peak, we've actually dropped significantly because of the losing competitiveness in the global market. And in fact, from last year, a high of about $31 billion export, we're down to $24 or something like a 22% erosion. And the unfortunate thing is semiconductors, electronics comes in different areas. Of course, there were some assignable causes, the Japan tsunami and the impact on the global market, but there are some specifics that would be of concern, and that's where I get into the three areas. The first one really would be and not necessarily in this order, the power cost. Many of companies, semiconductor electronics companies who want to start up obviously look at the cost of doing business. And if power is a high percentage of their cost of goods sold, then they're going to look for areas that offer lower power cost. We heard earlier that in the region, I know Philippines is one of the highest, if not the highest, and that's got to be something that needs to be addressed. In our business, in the solar business, we've started the wafer slicing industry. We wanted to start an ingot growing industry, but we can't do it here in the Philippines. We want to do it, we can't do it here. We have to go outside just because of the significant consumption on power. What can be done? Obviously, we need to look for renewable energy. We need to look for ways to reduce the cost. Maybe one way to look at it would be to revisit the removal of the royalty on natural gas. Okay. The other area would be related to labor, and this would be in different forms. First of all, multinationals are quite allergic to militant labor, okay, and the associated disadvantages of that. The next issue would be the minimum wage. In the Philippines, we have a minimum wage that's keyed on cost of living, inflation, whereas out there, where we compete, there's an index to productivity, if at all. So I would like to see labor laws that allow us to index wages on productivity and not just an automatic increase every year. The third area would be in the government area, and this could be a lot of things. For example, I know of a certain solar company that was interested in investing something like $3 billion into the country. But, unfortunately, there was not a whole lot of, in my perception, an active effort to attract them. I mean, the prevailing thought may be, so Intel left, some of these other guys have left, somebody will come in to replace them. Well, that's a fallacy. It's not an accident that the percent of foreign direct investment to GDP has been, I think we're second to last or last in the ASEAN region, 10% or even less compared to the norm of about 35%. It's because the governments in this ASEAN regions have focused on industries that they want to attract and have an active marketing program to bring them in. Of course, the other thing that we should be doing also is to have, I think it was touched on in the write-up, is to have an active program to advertise the Philippines, not a place for terrorists, where crime is high, where corruption is high. So build up on the beauty of the country, on the advantages of doing business in the country. And I think one advantage we have is with PEZA, okay, literally a one-stop shop place, well, almost. I think that's one of the areas that we do well for foreign investments. So bureaucracy is an issue. In PEZA, processing takes fast, but once you go out, for example, you get permits to operate, start up a business, that's where you get into trouble. So those are the kind of concerns that I think, if worked on, could promote the electronics industry.
Well, as you said, the best advertising is to show the world we're actually producing solar panels in the country. Let's move on to another representative of the manufacturing sector, because it's such a complex sector in this country. This time we want to hear from Roberto Batungbacal. He is the chairman of the AmCham Manufacturing and Logistics Committee. Bob?
Thank you, David. First of all, I want to thank John Forbes because he agreed to have two manufacturing people talking in this panel. So, thank you. But the reason I think the reason why he agreed, because first let me put some background very quickly. 3 things to remember about manufacturing. Number one, it's the biggest economic sector, biggest sector of the economy. It's about 21% of GDP, and we estimate total revenue to be about, in dollar terms, about $121 billion. In many measures, it's very important. In terms of FDI, in 2010, 85% of FDI are manufactured. In the same year, 40% of total investment is manufacturing. So it's big. Second, it's surging. Okay? It's actually surging. Why? In 2010, we had a 121% increase in investment in manufacturing to bring us to about $5 billion total. This year, as of the first half, it further increased by 191%. It's already $3.3 billion. I don't know how it's going to turn out the rest of the year, no? Now, needless to say, 85% of our exports are manufactured also. So it's very important, especially when we remember that manufacturing creates the highest multiplier effect to the economy. It creates, for every peso that we manufacture, it generates 1 peso 60 centavos of related economic activity, may it be services or whatever, no? But beyond that, we know that we have 7% unemployment, 17% underemployment. Of those, 57% are non-tertiary graduates. And manufacturing can actually, if there is enough, if we generate more manufacturing activity, they can absorb non-tertiary and excess agricultural labor. That's why it's inclusive, and that's why it's going to be very impactful if you do it right.
Now, your wish list.
Yes, wish list. No. Now, having said that, I think number one, it's already working right now, is that we have recommended to the DTI to create a Philippine manufacturing strategy. And that is based on first integrating the use of integrating basic sector to manufacturing sector. Because in spite of our success in electronics, nearly all the raw materials are not sourced here. So that's very important to create more impact. Second, we need to create a link between export and domestic manufacturers. What do we mean? PEZA has been very successful, but in my opinion, too successful that a local supplier, it's very difficult to supply to PEZA. It's easier for them to just import, of course, given competitiveness too, no? Pero it's not that easy to keep on supplying to exporters. So, but this is what's gonna create inclusive growth and deeper through deeper integration. Last, diversification, even further diversification. David, just one more thing. Yeah. Talking about diversification, electronic and semiconductor is very successful, no doubt. But did you know that according to the annual survey of Philippine business industries of NSO, semiconductor and electronics is only 14% of the total manufacturing. There's a whole wide range of manufactured products that we do. That should be more competitive for us to gain inclusive growth. That's all I have.
All right. Thanks so much.